Ukraine says its counteroffensive is gaining momentum and won't slow down even when bad weather hits. But a top U.S. general says the window for success is closing, with autumn just weeks away. Recent gains haven't come easy. Russia's defenses are deep. Ukraine's forces have had to pick their way through minefields and tank ditches and taken considerable casualties on the way. Western experts say they've shown courage and adaptability, but will need more weapons to keep up the progress. Meanwhile, Putin's army is under pressure, facing shortages of men and munitions. One reason why an unusual meeting in Russia's Far East made worldwide headlines. We're asking, Ukraine's counteroffensive, is North Korea bolstering Russia's military? Hello and welcome to the Point. It is a pleasure to greet our guests. Sarah Pagung is Program Director at Germany's Koerber-Foundation and has also worked with the German Council on Foreign Relations as an expert on Russian foreign and security policy. Alexey Yusupov heads the Russian program at Germany's Friedrich Ebert Foundation. And my colleague Roman Goncharov works for the Russian and Ukraine desk here at DW. And I'd like to start out, if I may, with a look at where things stand on the battlefield in Ukraine. And Roman, I'd like to begin with you, if I may. Ukrainian leaders are sounding quite a bit more optimistic now than they were earlier in the summer. Do you share that positive outlook?
Well, I would be cautiously optimistic. Indeed, we've seen in the past few weeks that the Ukrainian offensive has been more successful than during the whole summer, especially in the south. But I think it's too early to say that this will continue at the same pace. This is what Ukraine is hoping for, but there are several difficulties. So Ukraine is still trying to conceal where the major blow will be, because as soon as Ukrainian forces assemble its troops in one place, Russia is immediately hitting them with rockets, with aircraft, and that is why Ukraine is trying to disperse its forces and is trying to disguise where the major blow will be, as I've said. And that is why it's one of the reasons. And of course, there are other reasons, like the minefields we've been talking all summer about. And the weather is changing. It is autumn. It is the fall beginning. So that's why Ukrainian troops, the Ukrainian forces are under pressure. But in general, I would say we can be cautiously optimistic at the moment.
Thank you very much, Roman. And excuse me, I misspoke when I introduced you, so I do apologize for that. Let me go to Sarah now. And words like slog or grind, those are the kind of descriptions we're hearing when it comes to this inch-by-inch combat that the Ukrainian forces are undertaking. How significant would you say the gains are that have been made recently in the counteroffensive, and how great is the pressure on Russia's defenses?
So the gains that we have seen probably within the last 1 or 2 weeks, I think, are the most profound gains, probably not in terms of territory, because we're still talking about rather a small space that Ukraine conquers, but it's strategically important because they basically broke through quite important and quite strong Russian defense lines. But I think at the moment it's too early to say if this is a breach, if this is really a breakthrough, so something that can lead to greater Ukrainian gains. I think that will be probably visible within maybe the next 1 or 2 weeks. Also because, as you said before, time is running up. When autumn comes, it can get really, really muddy. So Ukraine really has to do something now.
And Alexey, talk to us a little bit about the status and situation of Russian forces. Their fighters at the front are said to have been there for very long periods of time, awaiting replacements that don't show up. There's also apparently shortages of crucial weapons like tanks and also munitions. How grave is all of that? Will Putin be worrying?
Well, the military command is certainly busy with keeping down the lines and keeping position, but it's, to be honest, it's much easier if you compare the toll which is being taken on the people, but also on the military resources. It's much easier to defend. And Russian armed forces has had a lot of time to entrench. And so even the advances that Sarah was talking about not yet are something where you could talk about a paradigm shift. Russia is in a strategic defense, talking about the battle space since many months, and this hasn't changed. And it's easier to maintain this position. And also, if you look at what the government and the military command undertake in terms of recruitment and replenishment, it seems to work without major mobilization waves. I mean, we don't need to take numbers for granted that are being translated by the official sources, but it is clear that replenishing fighters is not as complicated as it seemed to be half a year ago.
I want to come back to that in just a moment, because that recruitment drive is taking Russia quite far afield. But first, let's take a closer look at the status of the counteroffensive itself. In Ukraine, as we heard from Sarah, autumn means rain, mud, and cold temperatures. Will they stall the country's forces as they seek to break through Russian lines?
A gift for the Russians, they shout, and fire a mortar shell. Ukraine is reporting successes on the eastern and southern fronts. Further areas are said to have been recaptured and defense lines broken, but in small, risky steps. The area is mined. Autumn will soon turn the solid ground at the front into mud, and there will be enormous pressure on the soldiers. The offensive's success, according to military experts, will depend on reserves, that is, the number of soldiers Ukraine will still be able to mobilize. These students in Kiev have signed up for military training. After 4 years of it, they can become officers in the Ukrainian army. But how many new soldiers can be sent directly to the front is unclear. And to win the war, Ukraine is asking for one thing above all.
We need more heavy weaponry, and again, heavy weaponry.
Is Ukraine running out of time?
And Roman, if I may, it was Ukraine's chief of military intelligence who actually spoke the statement that I quoted earlier, saying that Ukraine's going to press ahead with this counteroffensive no matter what the weather does. Do you think that is feasible, or is he simply bluffing to lower enemy morale?
Well, of course it is feasible. Look, there will be, of course, a slowdown due to the weather conditions, but it will probably last a few weeks through November, maybe into December. But then, with the temperatures below zero, we can expect the fighting to continue. And we've seen that in the past year. So we've seen that especially the Russian forces had some advantage during the winter, and they could recapture towns like Soledar and later Bakhmut. So if the Russians can do it, the Ukrainians can do it as well. So I expect just maybe a short pause, a short slowing down. But on the other hand, look, the fighting now is mostly done by Ukrainian infantry. Ukraine is not sending all the heavy weapons that it got from Western countries in the past months in spring, like main battle tanks or other heavy vehicles to the front. So Ukraine is saving them. And the reason is because Russia has been very successful at destroying those pieces. Ukraine has only dozens of them, and they're very valuable for the Ukrainian army. So Ukraine is trying to send the infantry in, and that's why it is so slow. But on the other hand, mud is not a big problem for infantry. So if you're attacking, I do not expect maybe a major slowdown of the Ukrainian offensive.
You mentioned the recapture that occurred last winter. Let's say that Ukraine does succeed in breaking through and taking some of the areas and towns currently occupied by Russia. Would it have enough forces to hold them once it had them? Briefly, if you would.
Well, yes, I think the most important thing for Ukraine is to move about 15 to 20 kilometers towards the Sea of Azov, towards Crimea. And being there, Ukraine will be able to shoot, to put under artillery fire the very important road connecting the mainland Russia with Crimea. And this is the goal of Ukrainian armed forces at the moment.
Thank you, Roman. And Sarah, retired U.S. General David Petraeus recently told Deutsche Welle that it would be key for Ukrainian forces, and this is something that Roman just mentioned, to break the line of communication that connects Russia through southeastern Ukraine with the forces that are north of Crimea. So can you talk a little bit about Crimea? Is Crimea, in the end, essentially crucial to what happens in the further pursuit of this war?
It is, because it is strategically important to the Ukrainians as well as to the Russians. Because first, Crimea is used as a corridor, a logistical corridor for the Russian armed forces to gather like soldiers, but also military resources, military equipment through or on the bridge of Kerch. So this is really important. On the other hand, from Crimea, Russia can also strike quite deep into Ukrainian territory. And the third factor is that it hosts Russia's Black Sea fleet, and thereby is able to control the Black Sea and also Ukrainians' grain export via the Black Sea. So for the Russians, it's really crucial. And on the other hand, that's why for the Ukrainians it's crucial, because if they can hit the Russians there, they can hit their logistical corridors, they can hit their Black Sea fleet, and this is really important. So that's why Crimea is really one of the hotspots of this war.
I want to talk about the Black Sea fleet in just a moment, but a quick follow-up question to you. Could you imagine that within the next 6 weeks, before autumn hits, that we would see significant progress by the Ukrainian forces in terms of breaking through those supply lines that do connect Russia to Crimea?
To be honest, I am skeptical, because I don't say that it's like impossible, but it will be a hard task to do. Basically, because with the breaches that we see at the moment within the Russian defense lines, Ukraine has to widen them to secure their secure the Ukrainian flanks, and Ukraine has to, hold these breaches and these spearheads within the Russian defense lines, and then for pushing too fast forward can be a risk of, securing these spearheads long term. So I fear that it's a strategic choice that Ukraine has to make, and probably doing both will be very, very hard.
And Alexey, in fact, Ukraine recently launched a major attack on the Crimean port Sevastopol, which is the base for Russia's Black Sea fleet. How significant is that? Could that prove a turning point?
Well, it's certainly complementary to what Sarah is describing. So if you cannot physically be in range of direct artillery fire, but you can use medium or longer-range weapons to actually put Crimea and military installations on the peninsula in danger, then you circumvent the difficulties of actually advancing, but you put immediate and direct pressure on the Russian presence on the peninsula. It's also highly symbolic. I mean, Crimea is deemed, after annexation, as core land. It's a different status that you could see between Crimea and the newly annexed territory. So I think that the slower they advance and the more complicated it might get, the more important the part where, and this was the quote you've showed, heavy weaponry, missiles, munition, which is needed to sustain the pressure without being able to physically come closer to Crimea. Crimea is the punching bag. The more pressure is applied, the more obvious it is that the war does not progress according to a Russian scenario. So it's very crucial.
Mm-hmm. And Roman, the Ukraine military took the unusual step of acknowledging, of openly claiming to be responsible for that strike on Sevastopol. What does that tell us? Why did they? Generally, they don't issue such attributions. Why did they do it in this case? And what does the strike itself tell us about Kiev's missile capabilities?
Well, I think one of the reasons maybe they're very proud of it. And these are indeed very unusual events that we've seen in the past a few weeks. Just remember, there was a drone attack on a Russian military base near Pskov on an airfield where large air transporters in Ilyushin 76 were destroyed. Russia badly needs them to move troops around. Just a few days ago, and as we speak, Russia was attacked in Crimea, on the occupied Crimea. A big ship was destroyed, or at least heavily damaged, and for the first time a submarine. submarine that was used to launch missiles on Ukrainian territory. It is a very big success for Ukraine. And Ukraine also destroyed the Russian anti-aircraft S-400 system just a few weeks ago, and there are reports not confirmed yet as we speak. They managed to destroy a second one near Yevpatoria. So this shows that Ukrainian is maybe not so successful as everybody expected on the battlefield, on the front line, but on the other hand, deep inside Russian territory, Ukrainian is putting more and more pressure on the Russian army. And this will be just a matter of time when the Russian troops on the battleground will feel it.
Mm-hmm. And Sarah, clearly, Ukraine would like to be able to do more such attacks because, in fact, for months now, it's been pressing the U.S. to deliver Army tactical long-range missile systems. President Biden is said to be just a few days away from deciding. Would that be a game changer for this war?
No, I don't think so. Is any specific weapon system that we have been talking about within the last month is not a game changer in itself. We rather have to understand it as a puzzle where we have different pieces of puzzle we need to put together for, supporting Ukraine in a way that it can actually win this war. And I think these long-range weapons, like the American ones, like also the German Towers, are part of this puzzle.
Alexey, there's been ongoing debate for some time now about whether a boost in Western support, a real boost, would actually help bring this war to a quicker end, or whether it might provoke Putin to escalate. What's your take on that?
Well, I think so. What is a real boost, right? There is so much discussion about the definition of real. It's real. The support is real. The question is a distribution over limited resources over time, right? So there are two schools of thinking. The one is the one you're referring to, saying, let's put everything we have and can immediately activate or give to Ukrainian armed forces on the table and give it to them now so that there is a quicker end to this phase of the military confrontation. And then there is a school of thinking saying, this is going to be a long thing. So you need to project this over time, over the axis of time, which then links back to military-industrial capabilities of sustaining. So it doesn't make sense just to give a weapon system and not being able to arm it in a matter of weeks, but also link back to popular support in the European, especially in the European context. We have European elections upcoming next year. So there are two schools of thinking. I don't know which one is correct. History will show, and this is the tragic thing, that it's unclear whether it would be better. What is clear to me is that thinking about the depth of support, so not just talking about the weapon system, but actually talking about what does it mean, industrially speaking, logistically speaking, that this technology will be used by Ukraine over a long period of time. And I lack this debate, because it's debate about domestic capabilities, debate about long-term investment. I mean, it's going on, but it's not as in the focus as, this little bit fetishization of a specific weapon. It has a little bit of a Wunderwaffe taste to it. I don't like it, to be honest. Yeah.
Let's switch tracks now and talk a little bit more about what Russia might need to keep going. And Sarah, if I can start with you. Apparently, Russia has been trying to recruit reinforcements from places as far away as Central Asia, Armenia, Kazakhstan, and even from Cuba. How grave are the shortages that Russia's facing, not only of men, but also of munitions?
I don't think that the shortages are grave or really hindering the Russian warfare in Ukraine. However, I think the Russian regime has a problem. We have seen that within the mobilization wave that we've seen last year, that maybe didn't cause opposition or widespread protest in Russian society, but something like maybe unrest or people worrying definitely occurred. And that's something that the Russian regime wants to prevent, because it basically wants to stabilize its power. So it has to find ways to get soldiers and to recruit soldiers without causing this widespread or worrying among the Russian population. I think, looking in more regions far away from the centers, looking in other countries, offering a lot of money are measures to really prevent this kind of, people worrying inside Russia. And I think so that's this kind of measure. And that's, of course, a hard thing to do, because you need soldiers while you don't want to make too much fuss about it. But I think so far it works quite well for the Russian regime.
Yeah, and so it might not be enough for a new offensive, but it's enough for the defensive the Russian forces are in at the moment.
So given these constraints that Russia is facing, the recent meeting between Putin and North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un has certainly attracted worldwide attention. Kim traveled for 2 days in his private armored train for his first visit with Putin in 4 years. Russia's Vostochny Cosmodrome, or Space Center, was the backdrop for warm professions of friendship that included Kim's declaration of support for what he called Russia's sacred fight. What that support might entail in material terms remained unclear, but Putin did acknowledge the prospect of military cooperation, and most likely it was no coincidence that the Korean delegation included high-level military and munitions industry representatives. So let me go to Roman and ask you, how worried should Kiev be?
Well, Kiev should be worried, of course, because when Russia is getting more ammunition, we don't know, we speculate about that. It is, of course, a problem for the Ukrainian forces. I don't think Russia is in much need, but probably Russia is planning ahead for the next year, and then it could be a problem for the Russian army. Not at the moment, I think. It looks like Russia is preparing also for the case that Ukraine will get the long-range weapons like ATACMS we've been talking about. And in that case, Ukraine will intensify its attempts to destroy Russian munition depots. This is what the Western precision weapons are mostly used for. So Ukraine is striking very targeted the Russian ammunition depots, and this is where all the ammunition goes up, and that's why they need replenishment. One more thing is that my guess is that maybe they were also talking about the labor force from North Korea, because Russian economy is suffering from huge shortages of labor. A lot of men are fighting. Millions left the country who do not want to fight, and they need to be replaced. And President Putin is very much eager not to let Russian economy suffer. So he will be looking for opportunities to get labor force somewhere, probably in North Korea.
Sarah, comment on that also, if you would. And in fact, Russia is already receiving supplies from another pariah state, namely Iran. Do you think North Korea will be added to the list, and will it make a difference for Russia?
I think it looks like it. And I think as it is a puzzle for the Western Ukraine to put together Ukraine's military resources, it's also a puzzle for Russia. They have an industrial production, for example, of ammunition that is high, but that is not really sufficient in the long term, and they have problems meeting their goals. But it doesn't mean that they are really short of it. But it's also, it's also a lift for them. And I think North Korea, but also Iran, are for Russia a piece of puzzle that they need to really sustain their military efforts. And I think it's no surprise that both are pariah states, because if you're a state planning to deliver weapons to Russia, you face heavy Western sanctions. Yeah. But if you're a country like North Korea or Iran and you're already heavily sanctioned, that probably is not something that really, prevents you from doing so.
Let me ask Alexey to comment on those two, to some degree, potentially contradictory aspects of this, because these are two of the most isolated, heavily sanctioned leaders in the world, Putin and Kim. Even Putin acknowledged that if they try to do business with each other, there are going to be certain restrictions, as he put it. So what kind of support would even be feasible here?
I think the real contradiction is here that North Korea is not just under sanctions, it's under sanctions that were co-voted for by Russia. So you see, it's a different scenario now, and I think for a long time North Korea didn't have anything to offer. Even the labor contingents that were sometimes spotted in different projects, it's nothing significant. North Korea was a trouble for the Russian Federation, and they followed the Chinese lead. So if China wants to sanction North Korea, they are for it. If there is a phase of better relations, Russia has supported it. For the first time in the common history of modern Russia, there is a joint interest. So North Korea has something to offer. This hasn't been the case, and this is munition. And artillery, by the way, has a special place both in the Chinese but also in the North Korean military logic. So they actually have something to offer, and of course they have a lot to ask for, and Russia could deliver quite some things way below the levels which are relevant for actual technological sanctions.
So bottom line, our title asked whether North Korea will bolster Russia's military. Some observers say short-term maybe, but this is not a game changer. Would you agree?
Yeah.
And let me ask, Sarah, do you think that ultimately there are also systemic implications here, that pariah states are coming together? Will that, in effect, make sanctions less effective going forward?
No, I think the effectiveness of sanctions rather depends on, how much Western states really implement and follow up their sanctions. I think this is the much more important factor here, and that's something that we see is not really working as it should.
And very quickly, back to Roman. Roman, North Korean support a game changer?
No.
In a word. Thank you very much to you, Roman, for being with us, and also to our guests here in the studio, Sarah, Alexey. And thanks to all of you for tuning in. Look at our website, check it out, and tell us what you think.